time, but I just wanted to talk now to Rafe Hadelman, historian, broadcaster and senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. Rafe, a very good morning to you. Thanks for being with us on Tice Talk. You may have sort of caught some of the Sunday sermon there, and you, obviously this is it's in all of the newspapers, the lockdown files, but mainly in the Sunday Telegraph. As a historian, Rafe, how big an impact do you think this expose will have in terms of its impact on the possible public inquiry, its impact on how government may or may not change the way it operates? Because the last big one that I can think of was the expenses scandal back in 2009, I think it was. Do you think this is sort of akin to that, and do you think that lessons will be learnt from it?
Yes, and I think Isabel has done such an important work here, particularly giving it to the Telegraph, who, as you say, they were the ones who actually broke the expenses scandal. They're one of the few newspapers who have the resources and that tradition of investigative journalism that enables them to scour through these, 2 million words to bring out the salient evidence showing precisely how the nation was led by politics rather than by science in so many cases. And I think this will set things up very well for the inquiry, because inquiries quite often, whether it's a real whitewash or whether they just gloss over things, now that so much attention has been given by the media through these Telegraph releases about what actually did happen, about the discussions that were had, about the cavalier attitude of ministers, about the hilarity of the cabinet secretary thinking about people being quarantined, about the fact that there was no justification for the wearing of masks, and this nudge theory and behavioral science, most importantly of all, I think, the use of psychology and fear. I think those things will now definitely need to be given added emphasis in the inquiry. And so it's an extremely important piece of work that's been done, and it will inevitably, I think, shape the inquiry and also shape future governments' attitudes to further such incidents. Because to me, one of the greatest problems with what we've seen now with these WhatsApp messages and by the use of fear is what we can call, I don't know, you want to call it the boy who cried wolf. Nobody expected the COVID outbreak, this coronavirus pandemic, whether it's you believe in the lab leak or not. This came as a surprise to everyone. But everyone is expecting a flu pandemic. That's what all of our modeling and all of our resources have been actually designed for, was to tackle a flu pandemic. And that's still on the cards, whether it comes next year or 10 years or 50 years from now. And the problem is, now so many people have been burnt by the government's attitude and policies and lies and deceit and behavioral nudge. I'm not sure if we can expect the British public a second time, when you really need to actually have them follow government policy, how many of them actually will. And that's, I think, is one of the great tragedies of this episode.
And there's another sort of process point which is important. At the moment, as I understand, WhatsApp messages are not subject to freedom of information requests. And you can sort of understand why. Texts move very fast, almost ahead of the legislation.
Yeah.
Where do you think that will go? Do you think that text and WhatsApp and there's other platforms, do you think they should be discoverable and at a certain sort of rate? Where's this debate going to go?
Yes, so as you say, that they're not discoverable right now. They're treated like sort of whispers in the corner, in darkened corners. But now we've seen that actually these are essentially virtual meetings. A WhatsApp group is a meeting, and WhatsApp messages and text really are evidence of minutes. So I think now going forward, there has to be an impetus to actually ensure that these things are discoverable and that they be treated in the same way that you treat the minutes of any meeting, whether it takes place in the cabinet, whether it's in the back seat of a car now through a WhatsApp message. I think they now have the same status because we can see precisely what discussions were being had. I would think, Matt Hancock from now on probably will want to do most of his discussions, if you could go back in time, on the telephone, speaking rather than doing WhatsApp messages. But we are where we are, and I think that's another important development in this story.
I think it absolutely is. I want to look forward now, Rafe, to the other big story that's in some of the papers today, that we are finally 8 or 9 weeks on from the beginning of the year, expecting to see the legislation that's been promised by the government to try and stop the boats crossing the channel. We understand it might come out Tuesday or Wednesday, and there's all sorts of spin that it's going to, this is it, this is going to do the job, and this will stop the boats, that everybody will basically not be allowed to have a asylum claim made. What are you hearing, and how much confidence have you got that this will even get through the Houses of Parliament, and if so, in what time frame?
Yeah, well, this sounds great, but that's the problem. The Tories love to sound tough on immigration, but as we've seen over the past decade, it's always talk and little action. Because, you know, yes, this legislation states that once you've arrived here, you'll be sent to a third country. Well, what third country actually will you be sent to? We don't have any agreements set up with any other third countries apart from Rwanda. No one's going to Rwanda, and only a pitiful 300 people a year can Rwanda take. Yeah. Given that we have tens of thousands of people coming here,
it's irrelevant. Completely irrelevant.
That's irrelevant. That's not an option. I think really the Tories know that they've basically only got 18 months left in power. So it's extremely easy for them to finally come up with this very impressive sounding legislation, knowing full well it'll never see the light of day. If it actually comes into force in time while they're still in power, then you know full well that the left lobby groups and other NGOs will tie this up in the courts. So there is no chance we're ever going to see any real practical results from all of this tough sounding. But, you know, we know full well, every manifesto the Tories come out with says we will reduce immigration to the tens of thousands. That's what they said in 2010 and 15. Then they changed it down to reducing it. But every 5 years, we know that they've lied. And for some reason, a number of people in the British public vote for them, even though they've been lied to time and time again. But I think the game is fully up this time. There's no coming back from it.
And do you think it'll actually get through Parliament in this form, or do you think that some of those in the House of Lords will stop it and essentially just sort of kicking it into the long grass unless they use the Parliament Act?
Yes, no, I mean, it'll get through the Commons, no problem. It's going to get tied up in the House of Lords. It's just a question of for how long. And time, you know, and then time is.
I think rather like the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is a triumph of spin over substance. Rafe, great to see you this Sunday morning. Thank you so much for being with us here on Ties Talk.